The Battle of Gallipoli, fought between April 25, 1915 and January 9, 1916, in Turkey, was one of the most significant and tragic campaigns of World War I. Also known as the Gallipoli Campaign, the Dardanelles Campaign, or the Battle of Çanakkale, it was a joint Allied operation aimed at capturing the Gallipoli Peninsula to open the way to the Ottoman capital, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. The campaign is remembered for its harsh conditions, the valiant efforts of the soldiers involved, and the heavy casualties on both sides. The battle also had far-reaching consequences for the countries involved, particularly for Australia, New Zealand, and Turkey. The origins of the Gallipoli campaign can be traced to the strategic considerations of the Allied powers in the early stages of World War I. By 1915, the war on the Western Front had devolved into a brutal stalemate, with both the Allied and Central powers entrenched in seemingly endless trench warfare. Seeking a way to break the deadlock, the Allies turned their attention to the Ottoman Empire, which had joined the Central powers in late 1914. The Ottoman Empire, often referred to as the sick man of Europe, was seen as a weaker link in the Central powers chain, and the Allies believed that a decisive blow against the Ottomans could open new fronts and potentially knock them out of the war. The idea for a campaign in the Dardanelles and Gallipoli was initially proposed by Winston Churchill, then the First Lord of the Admiralty. Churchill advocated for a naval assault on the Dardanelles Strait, a narrow waterway connecting the Aegean Sea to the Sea of Marmara, with the ultimate goal of capturing Constantinople. This would not only cripple the Ottoman Empire, but also open a direct supply route to Russia, an ally of the Entente powers. The plan was ambitious, but it was also fraught with risks. The Dardanelles was heavily fortified, and the Ottomans were well aware of the strategic importance of the strait. The campaign began with a naval assault on the Dardanelles on February 19, 1915. The Allied fleet, composed of British and French warships, attempted to force their way through the strait by bombarding the Ottoman fortifications along the coast. However, the operation quickly encountered significant difficulties. The narrow and winding nature of the Dardanelles made navigation challenging, and the Ottomans had laid extensive minefields in the waters. On March 18, 1915, the Allies suffered a major setback when three of their battleships, HMS Irresistible, HMS Ocean, and the French battleship Bouvet, were sunk by Ottoman mines. The naval assault was called off, and the Allies realized that a land invasion would be necessary to capture the peninsula and neutralize the Ottoman defenses. The land campaign was launched on April 25, 1915, with amphibious landings at several points along the Gallipoli Peninsula. The main landing sites were Cape Helles on the southern tip of the peninsula and Anzac Cove to the north, where the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps Anzac landed. The landings were met with fierce resistance from the Ottoman forces, who were well prepared and had the advantage of high ground. The terrain of Gallipoli, characterized by steep ridges, deep ravines, and dense scrub, made the fighting even more challenging. The Allied forces, composed primarily of British, Australian, New Zealand, French, and Indian troops, faced a determined and well-organized Ottoman defense. The Ottoman forces were commanded by Mustafa Kemal, a brilliant and charismatic officer who would later become the founder of modern Turkey. Kemal played a crucial role in rallying the Ottoman troops and organizing a strong defense against the Allied landings. At Anzac Cove, the Anzac forces found themselves pinned down on the narrow beaches, unable to advance beyond the steep cliffs that dominated the coastline. Despite repeated attempts to break out of their beachhead, the Anzacs were unable to achieve significant gains and were forced to dig in and endure a prolonged and grueling campaign. At Cape Helles, the British and French forces also faced heavy resistance. The initial landings were bloody, with many soldiers killed or wounded before they even reached the shore. The Allies attempted to capture key positions, such as the heights of Achi Baba and the village of Krithia, but these attacks resulted in heavy casualties and little progress. The fighting soon settled into a brutal stalemate, reminiscent of the trench warfare on the Western Front. The soldiers on both sides endured horrific conditions, with sweltering heat during the day, freezing temperatures at night, and the constant threat of enemy fire. Disease was rampant, with dysentery, typhoid, and other illnesses taking a heavy toll on the troops. One of the most infamous episodes of the Gallipoli campaign was the battle for the Lone Pine Ridge, which took place from August 6 to 10, 1915. As part of a broader offensive aimed at breaking the deadlock, the Anzac forces launched an attack on the heavily fortified Ottoman positions at Lone Pine. The battle was characterized by brutal close-quarters combat, with soldiers fighting in narrow trenches and tunnels. The Anzacs succeeded in capturing the ridge, but at a terrible cost. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and the gains made were ultimately insignificant in the larger context of the campaign. Another major offensive during the Gallipoli campaign was the August Offensive, which was launched on August 6, 1915, in an attempt to break the deadlock and seize control of the heights of Chunuk Bair and Hill 971. The offensive involved a series of coordinated attacks by British, Australian, New Zealand, and Indian forces. The fighting was intense and chaotic, with soldiers battling not only the enemy, but also the harsh terrain and extreme weather conditions. Despite initial successes, the offensive ultimately failed to achieve its objectives. The heights of Chunuk Bair were briefly captured by New Zealand troops, but they were unable to hold a position and were eventually forced to withdraw. The failure of the August Offensive marked the beginning of the end for the Gallipoli campaign. As the campaign dragged on, it became clear that the Allies were not going to achieve their objectives. The troops were exhausted, morale was low, and the harsh conditions continued to take a heavy toll. The Allied leadership began to consider the possibility of evacuation, a difficult and dangerous operation that would require withdrawing tens of thousands of troops under the noses of the enemy. By late 1915, the decision was made to evacuate the Gallipoli Peninsula. The evacuation was carried out in two phases. The Anzacs and the Suvla Bay forces were evacuated in December 1915, followed by the evacuation of Cape Helles in January 1916. Remarkably, the evacuation was conducted with minimal casualties, largely due to the careful planning and the use of deception tactics to confuse the Ottoman forces. The Gallipoli campaign was a costly and tragic failure for the Allies. The campaign resulted in over 500,000 casualties, including more than 250,000 on each side. The Allies lost approximately 56,000 soldiers, with many more wounded or suffering from disease. The Ottoman forces also suffered heavily, with an estimated 87,000 soldiers killed. The campaign had a profound impact on the countries involved, particularly Australia and New Zealand, where the Gallipoli campaign is remembered as a defining moment in their national histories. Anzac Day, celebrated on April 25th each year, commemorates the soldiers who fought and died at Gallipoli and has become a symbol of national identity and pride for both countries. For Turkey, the Gallipoli campaign was a turning point in its history. The successful defense of the Gallipoli Peninsula was a source of immense pride for the Ottoman Empire and played a significant role in the emergence of Mustafa Kemal as a national hero. Kemal's leadership during the campaign laid the groundwork for his later role in the Turkish War of Independence and the founding of the Republic of Turkey. The campaign also had a lasting impact on the geopolitical landscape of the region, influencing the post-war settlement and the eventual dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. In the broader context of World War I, the Gallipoli campaign highlighted the challenges and limitations of amphibious warfare and the importance of careful planning and logistics in military operations. The campaign exposed the difficulties of coordinating complex operations across multiple services and the dangers of underestimating the enemy. It also underscored the brutal realities of modern warfare, where advances in weaponry and technology had made traditional tactics obsolete and led to unprecedented levels of carnage and suffering. The legacy of the Gallipoli campaign continues to resonate to this day. The battlefields of Gallipoli have become a site of pilgrimage for Australians, New Zealanders, and Turks alike, with thousands of people visiting each year to pay their respects to those who fought and died there. The campaign has been the subject of numerous books, films, and documentaries, which have sought to capture the heroism, tragedy, and futility of the conflict. The Gallipoli campaign serves as a powerful reminder of the human cost of war and the enduring need for peace and reconciliation. In conclusion, the Battle of Gallipoli was a defining moment in World War I, with far-reaching consequences for the countries involved. The campaign was marked by immense bravery and sacrifice on both sides, but also by strategic miscalculations and harsh conditions that resulted in a tragic loss of life. The legacy of Gallipoli is one of national identity, heroism, and the profound impact of war on individuals and societies. It stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring importance of remembering and honoring the past.